Welcome everyone to another workshop from the test camp. Thanks again to our host back there. Thank you very much. This is learning and teaching for grades K6, 5, 9, and grades 7 through 12. And we're about to discuss how learning and practicing test skills will empower your test confidence. Those of you joining us today live online, we wish you were here with us in person, but of course, you're welcome to contribute your comments anytime. We're going to get those included in our discussions up here on these boards. And if you join us directly through the Test Camp YouTube channel on demand, well, you're not here with us either, but you have a huge advantage because you can pause, restart, or replay that video anytime. All right, so before we get started, everybody's getting settled in here. Note that this workshop is the first in a 3-part series that we do for all states, okay? So the test camp, we provide training sites for teacher certifications across the country. And Florida has partnered with a company that brands the tests like you see up here on the left-hand side. And many states require tests that are branded differently. All right, the tests are listed in order and they're generally required. And this is what you've done too, right? You've taken the core tests already, all right? And then you had to take content and knowledge tests. How many of you done that so far? Okay, and then this is actually about, as it says, learning and teaching. All right. However, every state is different and the requirements might be different too. And the requirements might change. All right. So for example, you might find this interesting. See this learning and teaching test that you take here. Well, over in Florida, that applies to all grade levels. They call it the professional education test. That's my home state. And the learning and teaching tests qualify teachers candidates at different grade levels. So this is just another example of how tests might be different in your states. Now during this workshop, we're going to discuss the competencies used by test writers to construct the learning and teaching tests. So feel free to ask questions anytime. I'll stop, I'll repeat it for those who are listening or watching the video. And of course you can come up here at the end of the workshop too. All right, we're set here. Let's go ahead and get started. You likely know by now that around here our motto is prepare, practice, perform. Complete the training for this test and you're guaranteed first attempt success. And that's because taking a test is a performance. And a performance requires more than just knowledge. Quality performance also requires skills, and in this case, test skills. And then you earn the confidence that comes from learning and practicing those skills. In this first step of training, starting today, we're going to start by gaining knowledge about the test through workshops like this. That's how we do it. Then you'll also gain knowledge about yourself by going through the training, by going through the activities. How well you know the content, how well you know your level of test skills. Through the activities, you then practice. And you practice the test skills that you're going to need to get through the test. So that's how it works. Prepare, practice, and then you're going to perform. And when you do, this won't even be a concern because you'll have the confidence that you earned through the test skills training. All right, let's stop for a minute, take a breath. You get this. Prepare, practice, perform. Okay, so what's a great way to prepare? I mentioned just a second ago, start with knowing the test. So we start with what's called the test blueprint. And those of you who have been through other workshops, you know the blueprint is a first indicator of how well you're going to perform on the test because you'll know the rules and you'll know the content. Okay, there's an example of some of the blueprints and the workshops that we have to talk more about this, pathways to teaching, because every state is a little bit different, and why there's so much testing that goes on in the United States right now. Okay, this area is called My Study Plan, and you'll find that over at the training site too. This is simply a schedule that includes reviewing and studying the test content. So this plan that you can make for yourself shows you how to get to the test skills training designed specifically for the test that you choose. All right, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the workshop. Yes, question right back over here. I'll repeat for those listening in. Yes, so there's the subcategories over there. Where do the question was, where do these numbers come from over here that start up there at 1 and go down to 15? So that's a subtotal of the hours that it would take to get ready for a single test, according to those who have gone before you. Yes, the people who study, they say this is what they do. They spend about this much time in each area. You don't have to. It's up to you. It's like joining the gym. You decide how much you want to work out. But for those who've gone through the training, they always pass the test. It's not even a question. All right, well, that's a great question. Thank you very much. All right, so here we go. Let's see where I'm at here. This learning and teaching, this is like a table that we've created here to show you what's actually on the learning and teaching test. It's multiple choice questions. There's sometimes they're called selected response. And the first type is called a direct question. There you go. You see it up there. Now you're familiar with these. Here's an example. Direct question. That's nothing new. All right, but let's see who's honest here. How many people, when you saw this question, you started by reading up here? All right, let's see how many honest people we got here. Who started down here? A few of us did. All right, so we have some honest folks here. All right, well, the top section is called the stem, and the bottom is called the answer set, and that's where we generally start, is in the answer set. All right, the second multiple choice format then is called sentence completion, sometimes called fill in the blank. You know what's going on here. Here's another example. Are you starting down at the answer set down there? Did you start down there first? Okay. Another format is for multiple choice questions is called the scenario. Okay, these are the questions you might mark and save on a first pass through the test because they often require more investment of time. And what I mean by mark and save is that is something you can do on your test, and that's something you train for. We'll talk about that a little bit more too. But yes, you don't go through and mark and answer every question the first time through the test. No, anybody that knows anything about standardized testing knows that you always skip questions. Well, you don't just skip them, you review them and then you mark and save them. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So here's another question. Let's go ahead and scan these possible answers together. We start down here, choose their teammates, work together in assigned teams, pick a project, or choose a problem. All right, by taking just a few seconds to scan through the answer set, you now have a preview of the question. So let's take a look up here. Okay, so this is probably one we might mark and save because it would take a little bit too much time to go back and forth. But that's okay. So that's a brief look at the types of multiple choice questions you can see. So there's going to be nothing new here. You've seen this always before. So how many multiple choice questions are there on the learning and teaching test? Anybody know? Over here, you do. How many? That is right. There are 70 questions. So we're going to discuss budgeting your time for these questions in just a moment. Now the other section of the learning and teaching test is called constructed response, and you might guess what this is about. 2 questions each scenario, a total of 4 responses. So it's not multiple choice. You're going to be given 2 scenarios and then you have to answer 2 questions in each one of those. Okay, you see how that works? All right, and then 75% of the test is going to be a multiple choice. 25% is going to come from those constructed responses, those short answers that you give to those 2 scenarios. Okay, does anybody know the time allotted for taking the entire test? That's right, 2 hours. You heard that. It was 2 hours. You were absolutely right. 120 minutes. And so let's talk about this at your tables for a minute. If you haven't already introduced yourself to each other, have a discussion about what your approach might be to a multiple choice test like this, right? Especially if you have those 2 scenarios. Are you thinking maybe you look at those first, at least to get an idea of them? How do you think that might go? There's a question right back here. Can you go ahead and say that again? I want to repeat that for the people who are listening in. Are the multiple choice questions mixed on the test? Yes. So there's not a separate sub-test. You're thinking of the core test, right? Yes, there were separate sub-tests like reading and mathematics, writing. That's not the case for this test. Okay, any other questions? Yes, you can budget less time or more time for each section. It's up to you because they just give you the 2 hours. So it's up to you how you want to budget your time. And you, from what we understand, you can skip back and forth to each section. Okay, so go ahead, have a discussion at your table. How will you approach this test and how will you budget your time? We're going to come back as a group and compare your ideas. Hey, again, welcome for those of you who are here live online. If you would share your thoughts, we're going to try and include them right up here on the discussion boards. And if you're joining us by the Test Camp YouTube channel on demand, this might be a good time to pause the recording and consider your approach to a test like this. So how much time might be budgeted for each question? I'm thinking maybe you review those constructed responses first, just so that you know they're there, but then go up and maybe answer those multiple choice and knock those down, maybe in an hour or so, right? Okay, well anyway, it's going to be up to you. We'll compare your thoughts to our discussion when you restart the video. All right, well, welcome back up here. You guys are there? All right, back up here. Those who've gone before you recommend that budgeting about 1 minute for each multiple choice question and 10 minutes for each constructed response question. Okay, so if you can finish that first part in about an hour, that's going to give you 40 minutes. Let's add that up, 70 plus 40. Okay, so that's going to be what, 110 minutes. And that's going to give you about 10 minutes then to go back and review. Go back and check anything you might not have done or completed, or maybe some questions you marked and saved that you only got to a second time. Okay, so is this budget close to what you came with in your discussion? Pretty much you were kind of on the same page. Was there anybody that thought they're just going to try and answer those questions down at the bottom first and just get them out of the way? Okay, some of you thought maybe that's a good plan. All right, well, whatever works for you. And the good news is you get to practice some of that over at the training site first. So, all right, so any other questions then about the test format or budgeting time? Yes, right back over here, I'll repeat your question. Yes, thank you. We're going to talk about scoring and recommended study resources later in the workshop. I'll make sure I get to that, and if I don't, you let me know about it, all right? All right, well, let's discuss the test content, the questions, and how they're constructed. Because the first step to finding the correct answers is to identify what types of questions you can expect. Now, we're not talking about how the questions are formatted. We just talked about that. We're talking about identify the questions by the competencies on which they're built. So a question often asked is, well, who decides? Who decides who makes this test? Who decides what's competent means? Any ideas on that? Who do you think makes the test? Experts, you say? Well, who's the experts? Who do you think they are? Professors? Okay, well, you say the test writer. Okay, well, they're teaching professionals. That's who they are. They're from school districts. You're right. They're from colleges. They're actually recruited by the test company to construct test items that are valid, reliable, and what's called best practice. Okay, this is likely a term you've been learning about if you're in a teacher education program, right? Best practice. And test questions also represent, and this is important, what's new, what's out there today in schools, what is the current educational culture, right? And what does that mean? Well, that's what we're going to talk about here for the next few minutes. We're going to explore what this means and how it influences both the questions and the answers. Now, this is not an objective test. There is no right answer to this. The correct answer is the one that best matches what your state thinks or what this test thinks is the best approach to teaching. See how that's different than 4+7 or the core? That was objective. This is more subjective. So you might not always agree with the correct answer. All right, let's preview some of these and see. For example, we said that one of the competencies is students as learners. Right? Some of the key concepts include how students grow and develop in stages and how they learn best in each one of those stages. So we simply call this competency learning. Over there you can take a quiz based on that and you'll see it's called learning. Let's look at a couple of statements related to learning. So the teacher is expected to A, and I'm not going to read these out for you, you have to read them. Okay. And here's statement B. Now only one of these can be correct. Okay, not yet. Note that in statement A, they talk about students' interest and the teacher's role, which is to guide the student. All right. Statement B, the teacher believes in the power of reasoning, want the students to work and think things through, and they want to exercise that power. The teacher's role then is to encourage students not only to read, but it says here to study quality literature. Okay, so which way are you going on this one? I see some of you writing it down. That's probably not a bad idea. If you eliminated B, then you are matching current educational culture. Okay, a little bit of a surprise, but I'm just keep watching. You'll see. The second competency is students as diverse learners. Included are variables like home life, the different types of exceptionalities, legislation related to diverse populations. Okay, so diversity is what we're calling this. And again, let's look at a couple diverse statements. For example, when is the best time to encourage English language learners to practice their skills in class, their language skills? Would it be during low-risk situations when they're most likely to succeed? Or do you make sure they have a learning buddy? That provides them an opportunity to practice, but also to make mistakes. Is the teacher role to avoid putting the student in an embarrassing situation, or to encourage growth, which will likely include learning from making mistakes? Okay, what are you thinking here? How many folks think A is the right answer? And how many think B? All right, cross out learning buddy. All right, we're starting to see a trend here. All right, let's do another one. In terms of learning environments, student motivation, watch how the current educational environment is reflected in this pair of statements. Okay, so for environment, what might be considered appropriate or inappropriate when creating a classroom climate? All right, one that is inviting and non-threatening for the students, or one that is rigorous and likely to reveal the student's strengths and weaknesses? Is it better to have students describe their teacher as nurturing or as challenging? All right, how would you like to be perceived as a teacher? Would you like to have somebody say you were nurturing or you were challenging? All right, does your perception match the current educational culture? It does if you're inviting and if you're nurturing. All right, we're going to do one more example, and I'll give you an analogy. I don't want you to I don't become cynical over this. All right, the teacher provides explicit directions so that no student feels anxious about what's expected, or the students decide how to approach each assignment. It's up to them to figure out how to learn on their own. In the first scenario, the teacher is likely to provide directions in written form, on the board, as a handout. In the second scenario, the teacher's role is to direct the students to the resources so that they can think for themselves and develop their own learning skills. All right, what are you thinking here? Well, if you crossed out B, you are correct. You're aligned with the current educational culture. All right, before we go on to one more pair, I want to make sure that we understand we're not getting cynical about this. If your job was to drive somebody, an elderly relative or something, you had to drive them to another town, would it be important to get them there on time or to get them there safely? Yeah, well, most of us say both, but safely is probably more important. And that's what's happening here in schools. Both answers are probably good, but generally, this second answer down here at the bottom generally is not working. Let's look at another example. You'll see, if we wanted to talk about student progress, right, academic or social progress, is the teacher-student relationship, should that say private, one-on-one, so that the student and teacher talks about their progress? Or should you talk about this in the whole class? Grades are out there for everybody to see. So the environment in scenario A suggests that all matters are to be kept confidential. B recognizes the value of a teachable moment that might benefit the whole class. All right, so what are you thinking here? Keep it confidential. All right, remember the underpinnings of this competency. All right, what are you starting to recognize here about the current trends in learning environment? Let's do another pair. When a new student joins your class, assign the student to a group or introduce the student to the whole class. Maybe even have them tell a little bit about their background. So the goal of A is to make sure that there's no anxiety for the new student. And the goal of B is to help them in a new environment, help them test their social skills, maybe even determine their level of confidence in dealing with a new social situation. All right, is there any question that sink or swim, boom, not recognized as best practice? I know that's how my dad taught me to teach. He just threw you in the deep end. That's not part of current educational culture. All right, and speaking of culture, all cultures are to be shared and celebrated, or cultures are to be studied and compared. So is the learning environment one of tolerance and acceptance, or does a diverse population of students provide a unique opportunity for learning and debating different perspectives? All right, so in this case, you can go ahead and eliminate A up there. No, just kidding. Kumbaya. That's right. We don't want to have anything going on that might be what's called dissonance. Students are supposed to feel comfortable, and this is even creeping now into the colleges. Maybe some of you are in college here. You've heard about this national debate going on. Next is talking about instructional process, which includes compliance to state standards. scope, sequence, and units, theory, and the isms. You know what we're talking about there? Well, you will in just a moment. Okay. And then we're going to say again, what matches current educational culture? So we call this section planning. All right, so how do you go about planning a lesson? Not how you do, I shouldn't say that. I should say, how do you match the test in terms of planning? So if someone was to drop in on your class, would your lesson most likely be described as criterion based or design thinking? Okay, these might be new terms to you, so let's talk about those. Criterion is project based, usually generated from an established set of standards. So the teacher's role is to pose a problem, ask questions, and lead the students to predetermined answers. So there's a right answer. Okay. When there's a bottom-up answer, it's coming from the students, that's called design thinking. All right. So there's no predetermined conclusions, and you can guess we're going to talk about this. Okay, we need to take a break and talk about this. You probably know the answer, but talk about at your tables. Which do you believe in, and which do you think is probably the better answer for a test like this? Because only one perspective of planning is correct on this test. All right, we'll come back and talk about this as a group in just a couple minutes. All right, again, welcome to all of you that have joined us today live online. If you'll share your thoughts, we're going to include them up here and they'll become part of our discussion here today. And if you're joining us on demand, this might be another good time to pause the recording and list some of your thoughts about what we've talked about so far. Is there a big difference between the way you've been thinking, what you've seen maybe out there in the schools, and what you're seeing reflected on these test samples so far? Then you can compare your thoughts when you restart the video. Back up here. So we've had some, let me back up a little bit. So we've had some very interesting ideas here so far about what the correct answers might be. Although many of us here expressed an interest in having students taking charge of their learning, I think you are correct when you went ahead and crossed out design learning, right, at least for this test. Okay, let's view another set of planning perspectives. Would your planning reflect a group effort and collaboration, or do you intend to foster individuality, effort, responsibility in your class? Okay. We would find evidence of cooperation in your lesson planning, where students are encouraged to find answers together, or does your plan encourage competition, allowing peers to work independently and then maybe even be ranked among their peers? So the correct answer is, well, it's not individual effort and responsibility, and certainly never competition. All right, is this your experience recently and out there in the schools? What are you noticing? Does this reflect current educational culture? So you've seen some competitions in schools? Right, are they given prizes? Is everybody a winner nowadays? Yeah, maybe you're not too young to remember, but I can tell you in our day, there was one winner. Everybody else had a name, and it wasn't the second winner. Yeah, it was quite a different day. Let's try another pair. In this plan, you can expect to find that the teacher models the concept or skill for the students. And this is done so the teacher can follow instructions or give instructions. The students can follow instructions and they can find success. And the goal is generally you want the students to find success on the first attempt. All right, so compare that perspective to this one, Plan B. The students have to work to understand the concept or skill. The idea is that they might fail on their first attempt, and that's fine, or maybe even on their second, but they learn from their failure. So they take pride in their effort and accomplishment. Again, the first plan is generally associated with what's called direct teaching models. The teacher's in charge. Teacher does most of the talking. The second plan, you know this one? Of course, indirect teaching or indirect instruction, where the students do most of the talking and they're kind of in charge of their own learning, in charge of their own achievement. And the answer that most closely reflects current educational culture is, well, it's not B. In this, no groaning, no groaning on this test. In this next case, the teacher prepares a lesson plan that includes tips and tricks for learning, mnemonics, songs and rhymes. That whole contort your fingers thing. Have you seen this? That's going on out there in the elementary schools. Do something with your fingers so you can learn math. Especially they use this for low-level learning classes. In Plan B, the students are not given a roadmap to learning. They have to figure things out on their own. The idea of Plan A, make sure that the students are successful, especially on the first attempt. And in Plan B, again, there's going to be some failure likely, especially on the first attempt. Okay, any thoughts here about the correct answer? Plan A, you're doing great. Now see how I put the correct answer up there at the top? See what I'm doing? I'm trying to ensure your success. I want you to feel good about yourselves. There you go. All right, one more of these. Plan A, make a plan that claims to encourage higher level thinking. Plan B, include heavy doses of memorization and rote learning, the fundamentals. Plan A, lots of references to Bloom's taxonomy. You know about this, Bloom's taxonomy? Plan B, attend to the fundamentals before moving up that Bloom's pyramid. All right, so do you recognize the response that adheres to this test? Probably. All right, go ahead and talk about that. What do you see out there in terms of memorization and rote learning in schools? Is this important? 5 times 17, 50 plus 35, that's 85. I could do 5 times 100. That's 5 times 20 minus 3, so that's 100 minus 15. That's 85. Where did I learn that? 3rd grade. That's right. So do you have a worry that there's a lack of fundamental? Give me 2 numbers. I'm going. Do you have a story about a lack of fundamentals that are being used out there in the schools? And what's being tested out there? So what you're thinking about, what you've learned in schools, how when students are encouraged to learn, and what you might find on this test. We'll come back as a group and compare your ideas in just a few minutes. Hey, and again, for those of you who have joined us live online, share your thoughts, and we're going to include them here in the discussion today. And if you're joining us on demand, again, by the Test Camp YouTube channel, this might be another good time to pause the recording and think about how learning fundamentals are being handled in your school situations, and then compare your thoughts when you restart the video. Excellent discussions. All right, so we know your preference. Which answer would you eliminate on this test? Okay, so you think that fundamentals are important, but on this test you would eliminate memorization and certainly rote learning. All right, so we got it. All right, so the next competency is related. It's called instructional strategies. This competency represents what you do on your feet during the instruction. So it's basically teaching. We just simply call it strategies. And you'll find that strategies are very different than the previous competency, planning. This generally refers to teacher-student interaction. Okay, you got that, the teacher's role. All right, so is the teacher's role best described as leadership? Is that how you picture yourself, as a leader, or one who provides guidance? That is, as a government worker, like you who are about to work out in the public schools, do you react to the needs of each learner, or are you expected to promote personal responsibility in your students? All right, both are good answers, but only one's more dominant than the others. Remember the whole drive your elderly person across the to another city vignette there. Is it more important to get them there safely or on time? So the answer is leader. The perspective that most closely aligns with this test is A, because the teacher is in charge. How about this next one? Which is most important? An understanding of each student, getting to know the students, who they are and their background, or a thorough understanding of the course content? Again, both good ideas, but in the eyes of your administrator, is it better to be perceived as learner-centered, sometimes called student-centered, or subject-centered? All right. If you think that knowing your students is regarded more highly than deeply understanding your subject, you are correct. The next pair is related to your teaching approach. Do you start with the experiences of the learner, then show how that's related to the subject you're working on in the class? Or do you start with the subject and then try to relate that to the learner's experiences out there in the real world? So starting with the learner is called constructive, or we talked about the isms, constructivism. Starting with the subject is sometimes referred to as didactic. Okay? Didactic, right? All right, let's compare the two before you make this decision. Up there in the top, let's say you have a 6th grade science class and you're learning about marine biology. In A, what you would do is you would start with the students relating stories about their experiences with wildlife, like they went to SeaWorld or they went camping, that sort of thing. With B, you would study mammals first. You would master the concepts, the kingdom, phylum, species, that sort of thing. Then you would plan a field trip, and that provides a common experience for them, right? So let's talk about this. Is there a right answer here? Do you start with the student's experiences, or do you start with the subject first and then maybe go on field trip and that sort of thing? So what are you thinking? We'll come back as a group and compare your ideas with those who built the test. For you folks joining us today live online, share your thoughts again. We sure appreciate it. It's helped us out in the discussions. And if you're joining us on demand, this is another opportunity to pause the recording and think this through. What is your approach to the role of a teacher? All right, then you can compare your thoughts when you restart the video. Okay, up here. Yeah, everybody. Okay, so everyone here who's over 30 years old, not too many of us, but some of us, you likely remember that you would study the fundamentals first, and then you applied those to concepts in the outside world. So we would study marine biology, what it was, and then we would go to Marineland or SeaWorld or whatever it was. So in this case, though, as you might have guessed, B is not the preferred response on current teaching and learning tests. A represents the learning theory constructivism, and that's part of current educational culture. And if you haven't heard about the term constructivism, be sure to jot that down, become familiar with it before taking a test like this. All right, now here's an interesting pair. Does anybody recognize the situation here? What are we talking about? Go ahead. Yes, right. Some would classify current trainings as behaviorism. You want to give specific praise, tell students why they did something correctly, system of rewards and punishments. The other approach is called humanism. It's more general and encourages the student to take charge of their personal education. So what would we cross out here? Cross out A, because you don't want students to think for themselves. Just kidding. Yeah, no, we cross out B again. So the correct response is, it's up to the teacher, the adult in charge, to decide if the student is on the correct path. The sixth competency is assessment. And here are some of the concepts that are tested on this competency. So keeping in mind your role as a teacher, can you imagine what's more important? Students that come up with the correct answer or students that come up with new ideas? Is the reason for assessment determined that certain government-approved standards, goals, and objectives have been met, or can at least some of the focus be on creativity? All right, now again, let's not get too cynical here. However, if you're having any difficulty with this pairing and you've experienced public schooling, government schooling, think about how you were graded, right? Goals and objectives, king and queen. How many here are currently in a college teacher education program? Okay, a lot of us. So is most of the assessment on your progress, is it based on your test scores or the fact that you brought up good ideas in class? Yeah, how are you earning a grade? Right, there can be a lot of great talk about creativity and ideas, but a lot of times it comes down to test taking and getting a grade, isn't it? Here's another pairing. Are you expected to measure student progress with a comparison to a given set of standards? Sure sounds like the right answer. Or a comparison to the progress of others who are in the same grade, the same age level there. The first is called, does anybody know what that's called? Comparing to standards? Yes, criterion referenced or criterion based, right. The assessment is referenced or compared to certain criterion, certain standards or benchmarks. If you're not familiar with this, get to know this one. Comparing to peers is also called, nobody knows? It's called norm reference. Okay, the assessment is compared to a sample group. You've heard of this then. Okay, now you know. So a sample group, like another group of students at the same age level, for example. So both answers are appropriate, but in most cases, goals and objectives, they drive teaching, they drive learning, so you can expect A to be the most appropriate answer. Do you know the term for this type of assessment? How about for this type? All right, let's see if anybody knows. How about up there at the first one? Okay, yes, the first one is formative. All right, so now you know the second one. That's right. Summative. Again, both are appropriate depending on the situation. However, be aware that there's currently an emphasis on keeping daily or at least weekly records of student academic progress. That's kind of the current educational culture. So that means you're more likely to encounter test questions related to formative assessment. Okay, again, we're not saying this is the right answer. We're just saying that you need to get familiar with these concepts. And there's a tendency to ask more questions about formative assessment. Here's another pair. As you monitor student progress, will your focus be on the errors that students might make or on the ideas they might generate? So is the emphasis diagnostic, comparing the student's condition against a set of standards, or synoptic, a snapshot of how the students are kind of doing? No reference really to where they should be at a certain level. All right, you might think about this pairing in terms of a doctor's visit. Diagnostic. If you're being diagnosed, that means there probably is a problem and that needs to be fixed. Synoptics, it really doesn't assume anything. It's like getting your yearly physical. You simply get a report that provides a picture of what your current situation is. So think about public school teaching for a minute. Think about you as a doctor. What's your role? Correct. Teachers have a responsibility beyond administering a physical. They must also evaluate and assess the physical report and then act upon it. So the assumption is everybody's broken and they need to be fixed. Again, the assumption is, yes, go ahead. Well, that's what you're seeing in the schools? Right, and yes, and now, it has to be done now, right? So if something's broken, well, we got to do something about it. So there's always urgency, isn't there? Good point. The seventh competency from which test questions are made is called professional development. Here's some of the main concepts. So being a professional, we call this competency just simply professionalism over in the quizzes and tests, how you're expected to improve as a teacher. And you likely haven't had a specific course that says professionalism, right? Maybe you had a course that said assessment or one that said teaching strategies, but probably not one that said professionalism. So as an introduction, let's talk about some scenarios that require professional behavior. For example, how to handle student conduct. So how is student conduct best monitored by a teaching professional? Are they expected to monitor and record students' attitude pretty much daily, or include student conduct as part of their course grades? Is it ongoing or reviewed at the end of the grading period in the grade book? Okay, what would you say here? That is correct. Student conduct and student achievement are two different things, two different issues. And again, there's an issue of doing something now, like she said back here, urgency. All right, what if you need curriculum assistance? All right, you know what we mean there? So you're not quite sure what you're teaching, you're a new teacher. So as a professional teacher, you have a question about really what's being taught. And the professional move is to utilize school personnel, ask other teachers, ask your department chair, that sort of thing. Or you take initiative and you just learn for yourself. You study, you do some research, you go back to school. In other words, does a professional teacher lean on their local community or more generally the research community? Okay, what would you think about this? Well, again, the answer is A. It has to do with urgency. Right. Remember the diagnosis analogy we talked about first? The assumption is that something needs to be done now. There's no time for consulting research or taking a course or going back. All good, again, back to the whole driving analogy, but there's going to be a lean on getting something done now. This next pairing is related to professional teachers seeking an instructional assistance. So things aren't going right. They want to know how to teach a little better. Option A, look at your current practice. Try to make some improvements. Start with yourself. Option B, go to your peers, your local community of professionals. So where's the starting point? Is it called reflective practice, where you start by monitoring your own behavior and making your own improvements, or is the starting point consultation? You seek the advice of others in your building. Any idea on this? Yes, go ahead. I'll repeat for those listening. So you've heard of reflective practice. I was going to say that. That is something you really want to hone in on. Generally, always the correct answer, right? You always start by looking at yourself. So we're going to cross out B on this one. Yes, if you haven't heard of reflective practice, get familiar. Okay, how can you best monitor your general improvement as a teacher, just in general? Do you monitor test results, like every day, or do you use the teacher gradebook to get an overview, say at the end of the semester? So improvement in general, do you measure your overall performance day to day, or do you stand back and take more of a summative view? And I'll give you a hint here. The answer is really a little more deceiving. Think about it this way. If you wanted to monitor your health, I don't know, maybe you want to get on the scale for weight. Is it a good idea to get on that scale every single day or about once a week? Okay, so there's no clear-cut answer here, but there is a danger for even for professionals. I'm going to cross out A for the first time, I think, because you don't want to beat yourself day after day after day. You do need to be reflective, but for general improvement, a summative review, maybe at the end of each week, each semester, that sort of thing. All right, let's look at one more scenario, and we're talking about professionalism still. This is about parent involvement. Is it preferred on a test like this that you contact parents through the students or that you make contact directly? Right? The first strategy suggests that students, they know the culture of their household, and therefore they're going to make good carriers of the information back and forth. The second strategy suggests that you work directly with the parents. And this leads to more open communication. All right, so which way are you going here? Well, the preferred response is A. The old triad of the teacher and parent and student, that's kind of changed over time. So be aware of that. Ask your teachers and advisors about that, and look for questions on practice tests about how to be involved with the parents. The final competency then is education, law, and ethics. And there are relatively few test questions built on this competency. We simply call this ethics. But here's a few pairs of perspectives that you need to know in terms of ethics. First is in the case of student injury, and this is pretty important. So if there's a student that's injured or even perceived injured, response A is that you should inform your local government officials, outside the school even. Response B is to inform your school administration. Response A, you might contact someone like, say they've got bruises on their arm or something. You might even call the Department of Children and Families. That's like they do in my home state of Florida. Or inform the appropriate colleague at your school, like the guidance counselor that's in charge of that, or the nurse. All right, does anybody know this one? Yes, back here. I'll repeat for the folks listening or watching in on the video. Okay, so you found in a course you took that you should always inform an outside source, and you are correct. Go with response A. If you don't know about this, this is an area you'll probably want to review and study. Yeah, here's another situation. What are the implications of law and ethics related to your use of technology? Are you bound to follow licensure agreements for use of technology in your school? Or do you consult local personnel, like whoever's in charge there at your school, if you have an issue with what you can and can't do? So are you bound by government law or local practices? And the correct answer here, know the law. Yeah, your school might have made a deal with the technology for software or whatever it was, but you need to know about that. All right, and what are the implications about using email, or what might be some of the hazards? Is the main concern about opening messages that might have potential viruses? Or is the concern related to non-academic or fraudulent information? So more specifically, is the main concern that you might do something that's harmful to the system or harmful to yourself, or maybe to the users? Well, the first responsibility is to protect the system, so cross out B. Okay, let's review what we've discussed here today so far. We said that there are 8 competencies. I see some of you have been writing these down, so take a minute at your seat. Make sure that you can list all 8 competencies, and with everybody there at your tables, you can probably do these in order. All right, then check with your colleagues, see if you all have the same list. We'll come back and talk more about the blueprint in just a few minutes. Those of you joining us today live online, this is an opportunity to go ahead and share your ideas about the list. See if you can do them in order. And the same for those of you who are joining us on demand. This is a good time to pause the recorder and make sure that you understand the blueprint of this test. All right, we'll be here when you restart the video. All right, as we go through the competencies up here, okay, while we go through the competencies, I'm also going to post the percentage of each competency, what's on the test. So let's go ahead and run through these. We're not going to spend a lot of time on them. So learning, everybody had that, of course. It's about 7 questions. We said 70 questions on the test, so about 10% come from there. Okay, diversity, also 7 questions. What was the next? Environment, very good. All right, and 7 questions there too. So you see how that has to do with the student. Start with the student, understand the student, and number 3, set up an environment for them. Okay, then we go to planning. I'm going to lose my place here. That's first of the 2 instructional processes. So you have to plan, 10 questions on that. And do you remember what you have to do after plan? Yeah, you have to teach. So strategies. And you're going to see about 10 questions there. All right, so that first section up there, about 20 questions or so on the learner, setting up an environment, and then about 20 questions on, what do they call it, instructional strategies or something, instructional process, that's it. Okay, number 6, assessment. Actually, you could put this with planning, teaching, assessment. You think there's going to be quite a few questions here? 15 related to assessment. Remember, a lot of you are going to work in a government school. Assessment's very important out there in the world. Okay, professionalism, 7 questions, and school law and ethics, 7 questions. So there you have it. That's how the 70 questions are laid out. And you can see here at the test camp what we do is we have a set of quizzes that are based on each one of the competencies. Yes, go ahead. I'll repeat for the folks that are watching the video. Yes, you do. You get multiple attempts on each question, on each quiz. All the questions and the answers are randomized each time. So again, however, on the learning and teaching tests, the questions are all combined, right? You're not gonna. It's not gonna be like this. You get that right. And we have practice tests for that too. Okay. Remember also, we can't forget this, we spent a lot of time talking about the multiple choice, but that's just 75% of the total score. The 4 constructed responses are based on 2 scenarios, and that's how they score you. You get, there's a rubric, and we have that for you too at the training site. You get a 2, a 1, or a 0 based on the test skills that you see down there. They're not essays, but they're short answers. And I'll tell you what, the study guide, we're going to talk about the test information guide. It's called the Study Companion. They do a great job. It's written by the test company, and I'll show you how to get to that in just a moment so you can see some examples of that. Okay, so we have to talk about how we're going to prepare again for this test, and you already started. I hope you've learned a lot here today about what's on the test. Do you feel better about that? All right, you see now why learning the competencies are so important, right? Well, another way to prepare is to select the right resources, the tools you might need to guarantee your success. So expect to see this sign along the pathways later today when we get over there to the training site. And what this means is anybody has been through this before, you've been on other sites, you remember what this is? Would you tell everybody, please? And I'll repeat it for those listening in. Well, thank you. That's exactly what it is. These are messages that are posted by those who have gone before you. So sometimes they're encouraging messages. They give you some advice. And in this case, the message is to avoid spending your time and money on expensive resources that you just don't need. Commercial webinars are a good example. Avoid paying a fee for anything that's free. I mean, free test information is out there, strategies we've talked about today. On the Study Companion, same thing. So they're suggesting to avoid commercial webinars. Expensive tutors and tutoring companies, that might be an option for more challenging tests like the sciences or mathematics, trigonometry, calculus, anatomy, physiology, but certainly not for this. This is a very subjective test. They have not been very effective on this. Overpriced study guides also out there trying to get your money. They're sold for profit. Anybody have any experience with study guides? How much money for these things? $30, $40 or more? Well, many are free. Many are very inexpensive. We're going to talk about that in just a moment, just like we do in the other workshops. One of the suggestions by those who pass the test say just use your textbooks. And especially now that you know the competence being tested, you can combine the textbooks with your training and you'll be fine. And they are right. They pass first time every time. And speaking of that, over in the training center, the My Resources area, we have the most popular and up-to-date tools listed there for you. So there's those study companions, even a study guide that you can get used. Look at there, for last time we checked, $5 for used copies. Show up to your door in 2 days. So again, very either free or very inexpensive. So their recommendation is, instead of investing time and money on resources, invest in yourself. Practice your test skills. Expect to gain confidence. Expect to gain personal independence that you can pass on to your students. Now, the training site provides for you, up there at the top, you can see all these activities, starting with My Test. This is the activity that enables you to check your understanding of the test blueprint, like we talked about today. So you actually take a test about that. And you can also take a pre-test there too before you start training. This is the test camp problem solving system up here. The first step to finding the correct answer is to identify, right, the type of question by the competency. Sound familiar? That's what we've been doing here today. Has that been helpful? All right, good. Quizzes and tests provide an opportunity to practice your test skills while assessing your test content knowledge. So you don't have to go and review and study everything, just those areas that maybe are more challenging. And like we mentioned before, the quizzes are based on the competencies, and the questions and answers change randomly on each attempt. There's even a combined, I know it's difficult to see, but down there at the bottom there's a combined quiz. It's kind of a mini test to get you ready for the practice tests. And these are just the same. Every time you take a practice test, it's going to be randomized. You can do them up to 3 times. It's going to look just like the test you're taking, 70 questions. Many of the features like you can expect to find in your test, like a timer, will be on there, that mark and save button. And as you complete the training activities, you can earn points on that post-test towards a professional test certificate. That's actually a guarantee of your success. Everybody passes. That's why you can expect to perform with confidence, because that confidence comes from the knowledge and skills that you earned during the training. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. There's no better time than now for us to empower your test confidence.